Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Back in 2012, I was working for a small security company. We were contracted to work at a tourist location called Broadmoor Seven Falls near Colorado Springs in the Cheyenne Mountain Canyon area. I remember shifts being grueling due to the fact that we were in direct sunlight until the afternoon and evening, and on an average shift, we were expected to walk a minimum of 7 or 8 miles between the base of the parking area to the top, the falls. Rarely were we allowed using the guest elevator for the handicapped and elderly. The whole park was on a hilly incline, so walking the top down was okay, but bottom up was exhausting. In the evening near the base of the falls, native Ute or Cheyenne tribal dancers would perform, and we had to monitor crowds. These falls were frequented by area tribes for hundreds of years and were still considered spiritual. So it was the native tribes that pushed for the performances. Since Seven Falls is considered a state park, at the end of the night we would sit at the main entrance into the falls at the bottom of the canyon and monitor the toll booth. During weekends and holidays, we were out there until 3 a.m. On several occasions when waiting for the end of my shifts, I always had occurrences that made me feel like I was going to get attacked by either an animal or a person. We would hear hissing sounds and groans. Sometimes there were glowing eyes, either red or white in color, but larger than area wildlife. These could be seen from behind the bushes and tree canopies. But what stuck with me were the shimmering humanoid shapes. The shimmering was otherworldly. The way I always described it to my family and a few friends was like that of the Predator film Alien when it was cloaked. My first work firearm was an older Smith & Wesson semi-automatic single-stack pistol that was my dad's when he worked for the local police department. But I still felt I was defenseless. I watched this shimmering silhouette crawl on the asphalt over to the toll booth. After that, it appeared to stand upright and extend a long waving arm. This looked like an entity between the physical and incorporeal realms. As I shifted my weight to get a closer look, I was struck by the glowing reddish eyes. I then watched as the entity jumped to a tree no less than 20 feet away. From here, the entity jumped again. This time, a broken branch fell from the tree, creating a loud crashing sound. The entity looked back one last time before going over the gate and disappearing into the park. In May of 2022, an old coworker and I ran into each other while at Walmart. We decided to go to the nearby diner next door and talk about the good old days. During the conversation, he asks if I ever saw the Predator and its camouflage at Seven Falls. My blood ran cold. He then proceeded to tell me about his experience on his shifts that I'd never heard. After leaving the diner and arriving home, I sat in the driveway for a moment contemplating what inhabits the park.
This incident took place a few years ago in my flat in Glasgow, Scotland. I live in an old tenement building with a half-dozen flats that was built in the late 1800s. A few months before it happened, someone very close to me had died suddenly, very violently. I hadn't been sleeping well as a result of their death. I share my flat with my boyfriend, so I wasn't alone when this happened. He was sleeping next to me. There was a small table next to the bed. I would often watch online movies until 3 or 4 in the morning. I would often wake up with nightmares or just weird vivid dreams. The incident took place when I was awake. I was watching something on YouTube and kind of dozing off and on at around 3 in the morning. I figured I'd go to the bathroom before I tried to go to sleep. So, I would get up and go to the toilet, then go back to bed. After I returned to bed from the bathroom, the first thing that happened was I turned off the iPad. I decided I was going to try to go to sleep and was lying in bed. I then had this bad feeling, like an ominous feeling, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and it was this kind of rectangular static cloud floating above me, maybe 1.5 feet above my head. It sounds kind of silly, but I'd been kind of saying in my mind, to my friend who had died, if you're going to show yourself to me, if there's life after death, do it in a dream. Do it in some other way. I don't think I can handle seeing you. As I was watching this weird cloud, I thought that maybe this is how she shows herself to me. But it didn't feel positive. It felt a little scary, and it was like this rectangular kind of like boiling static above me, and at first, I thought that my eyes were tired. I've been watching Netflix all night, so I looked away, blinked a few times, and looked back up until it was still there. I started to become really afraid, and I think at some point I got up and went into the other room and watched TV. I just wanted to get out of the situation. A month or 2 later, a similar thing occurred. I've got a little dresser across from me, so it's kind of like a narrow hallway between me and the wall. I'm lying there, turned off Netflix, and turned off my iPad. Something catches my eye. A figure of a stocky man of average height. It was a heat wave-like texture to this silhouette with very clear edges. I could see red glowing almond-shaped eyes. I was just lying there watching it and afraid. I wasn't sure what to do. It didn't come toward me or anything, but it just felt ominous the way that it looked at me. Its shoulders were hunched as it moved across my room, and when it passed my field of vision, I hid my head under the blankets and waited for several minutes. I finally gathered the strength to look out. It was gone.
Back in the early 2000s while turkey hunting, I encountered one of these Glimmermen beings in the woods in Iowa. Being a hunter and spending a lot of times in the woods, you have heard every sound coming from the woods before. When you turkey hunt, you are completely camouflaged and sit down in the woods for hours, usually against a tree or another backdrop. After hours sitting in the woods listening to every sound of the animals, trees, and leaves crunch beneath the squirrel's feet, the entire woods went quiet. When this happens in the woods as a hunter, you know that a larger predator has moved into the area. After a few minutes of complete silence off to my right, I heard a clicking sound. It kept repeating and sounded almost mechanical in nature. The woods remained completely silent except for the periodic clicking sound. I could not pinpoint the source of the sound, and after probably 20 minutes I started to get that uneasy feeling and got up from the ground and started to head back to my truck. I sat in my truck for a few minutes and tried to think about what just occurred. Although I did not see what was making the clicking sound or what moved in to make the woods quiet, I believe it could have been one of the beings watching me but did not engage due to the shotgun I was holding in my lap.
I think my account deserves a little backstory. I was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in 2018. Also in the Southwest U.S. I was awaiting retraining for a new Army Strategic Forces command, and I was technically jobless. I didn't have to report to duty, and I only had to show up and show my face at the squadron at 8 a.m. and go home for accountability. I got into this really weird cycle of sleeping in 2 4-hour sessions per day. I would sleep from 11 p.m. to 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. When I would wake up at 12 a.m., I would walk over to the base gym from my dorm and have a heavy workout session, and then walk back to my dorm through a little patch of desert with trails going in a ton of directions to the dorm buildings. One particular morning, as I was leaving the gym at about 1 or 2 a.m., I got through the desert patch and into the street facing my dorm building. I saw a glimmer to the left of me about 100 yards away. It looked like the light from the auto hobby shop shimmered, but I tried focusing on it as I stopped in the street. Then I saw this humongous translucent creature running under the street light, crossing the road and into the empty abyss of the desert behind the gym. I don't think I've ever run in fear like that in my life. The next day I tried recreating the situation after talking my roommate's ears off about it. We went to the location and I stood where I was and my buddy recreated the creature. He is super quick and runs a 9-minute mile and a half. He was running as fast as he could across the road at the same speed the creature was moving at. He was winded when he ran the distance, but he moved at the same speed this thing did. I've never heard of the Glimmerman until looking stuff up that night on the internet about it.
I'm from Australia, I'm 50 now, but when I was young my mum went to hospital with bad asthma. I was in mum's room jumping on the bed, dad went outside to get wood for the fire. I was looking through the crack in the door between hinges to the kitchen light lit up the bedroom just enough I could see, when a black silhouette caught my eye. It was standing behind the door next to the bed I was jumping on looking at me. It was a black glimmering mirage. I keep looking at the crack where the light showed through. My guts were in my throat, fear had frozen me. Then I heard Dad's boots on the back step coming up the veranda and the thing was just gone. It was as tall as the bedroom door. I was awake. I remember pretending I didn't see it and didn't look at it.
Something happened to me and a friend at a rainbow gathering in 2009 in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. It was right before the loads of people showed up and we were camped away from everyone else. We were alongside the main trail that goes from the parking area and leads down a large hill into the main clearing. It was dusk, so light was fading fast and we had a fire going. We were both sitting there having a deep conversation about life and spirituality, when we decided to head down the trail to the clearing to find some food. At that moment we were standing up and some people who had been walking up the trail stopped to take a break about 30 yards below us. Anna says, "Hey, do you hear that?" I could clearly hear someone walking in the woods to our left. The thing is, there was nothing out that way as we were quite a ways from the main clearing and facing the direction of all the lights and people. The footsteps could be heard coming from our left and below us, heading straight for those people who were taking a break on the trail. I looked and saw nothing where my eyes said I should be seeing what was making those steps. There was nothing to be seen, and I could actually see where the steps were landing, leaves being kicked up. Whatever it was walked up to those people on the trail, who were talking to each other. None of them noticed anything, but the steps definitely slowed down as it made a turn going past them, like it was checking them out. Then it came straight at me and Anna. Anna was fumbling with her keychain trying to find a little flashlight she had. Whatever was making those steps came right up to the other side of the fire pit without stopping. It approached slowly, and Anna pointed her light at it and said, "Hey." As if in response, it took off up the hill right past me incredibly fast, kicking up leaves and dirt. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it. The entire time it sounded like an invisible child power walking, taking short quick steps, and when it took off past me it was still power walking, with small machine gun-like steps, if that makes any sense. There would have been no way for me to chase it. This thing was so fast and we both took off running down the hill. This really happened. I don't think it was a ghost, because it didn't seem human. I always leaned toward fairies or leprechauns for some reason. I had the distinct impression that the little invisible dude didn't realize it was being noticed.
I have had two experiences with something that I could either see through or was cloaked somehow. 1. Winter 1993 or 1994, Brickton, Maine. The thing I saw was not a machine. I have no idea what it was, but it was close to me and flying. On a very cold winter night in 92 or 93. I stepped out of a house I was visiting to the car at about 10 p.m. and looked up, Brickton, Maine. It was exceptionally clear and starry, brilliant stars. Right away I saw movement above me. Something was moving, rapidly twisting and turning like a bird, like birds in a fight over some scrap. This thing was about 60 feet above me, looping back and forth within an area of less than 10 feet. It was about 5 to 10 feet across and it was transparent. It looked like it was made of glass, like a glass sculpture the way the stars behind it were distorted. I bought a glass sculpture of a bird to explain the way what is behind it is distorted due to the differing thicknesses and bulges on the surface. When moving, spinning, swirling, wherever is behind it is visible but distorted. I can't say for certain that it had wings, but it moved like a bird. I got the sense that it was angry, distressed, or just plain pissed off. I would not have seen it except for the exceptionally starry night and the light from the stars behind this thing streaking/shifting/distorted. If it were cloudy or daytime I would not have seen it. I watched it for about 3 minutes before it went out of sight behind some trees. I don't think I can properly convey how fast this thing was moving in tight twists and turns. It was like a living thing with a body, thicker in places, thinner in others, not uniform like a machine. If a person had body language like this I would say they were out of their mind angry. I've never heard of anything like this or anyone who has seen anything like it in the sky. 2. Pleasant Mountain, Brickton/Freiburg, Maine. Near the top of the Fire Lookout Station Trail, 1994 or 1995. I hiked the Western Trail to the Fire Lookout Tower. As I had many times before. Almost always with a dog, but not this time. On the way down, not far from the top was a stretch where there were thick evergreens to my right side had steep rise, and to my left widely spaced trees. Not evergreens, ground sloping down to the left, light undergrowth, 200 feet visibility. I heard something heavy charging me fast, very fast from the left. When first noticed I would guess it was just beyond my 200 feet visibility. It got closer and closer, I would say not more than 50 feet away when it stopped. I could not see anything. I should have been able to see a 20-pound dog. I know how a moose runs, it has long legs and a distinctive gait. I also know what a buffalo sounds like, shorter legs and a unique gait. It sounded like a big heavy buffalo. I have no idea what it was. I should have been able to see it because it was very big/heavy and close. It sounded like it had hooves. What I heard was not simple twigs breaking but like the thunder of a stampeding animal, ground shaking. It scared me. Only recently when I think of it did I consider that whatever it was stopped when it got close because it saw how big I was, about 310 at the time. Recently, I have heard of other people being falsely charged by something they could not see and other witnesses reporting something cloaked like in the Predator movie, and heard these reports from missing 411 accounts. If you ever hear of something seen in the sky like what I saw, I would really like to know about it.
This is my story. It was early November back in 2016, and I was laying in bed and about to sleep. I was laying on my side, facing the wall. I finished praying and I began to slowly sing under my breath to myself as I occasionally did while going to sleep. While I was singing, I got a feeling like I was being watched, and I heard something from behind me. I turned over to see what it was. When I turned over, I saw something that I just couldn't believe, and I sat up quickly in order to stay aware. I saw in the middle of my room, squatting by my doorway, a humanoid figure. It had red leathery skin and it had no eyes where it should have had eyes. It had these raised ridges of skin vertically up and down its upper face where its eyes should be. It had no ears. Instead, it had holes like snake ears in the side of its head, and they had these curves like normal ears, but instead it was inverted inside of the head and not out of the head. It had these large hands with black nails like a dog would have. It had huge feet with 4 toes on each, again with large black nails. I was panicking, and I pinched myself to make sure I was asleep, and to no avail, I didn't wake up. I was looking at the creature, and I noticed it was looking vacantly in front of it, and then it turned and looked at me, and it tilted its head like a dog, and it smiled. I'll also add it did not have lips. So it had a wide smile with these odd, inhuman-like teeth. It then did something that I still don't understand. It went invisible, as in, it turned invisible, but I could still see the distortion where it was, like the invisibility effect like in Halo or Fallout. I could see this distortion slowly begin to move towards me, and I saw the carpeting in the room shift as it walked on top of it. It got close to the bed and I started to sweat with fear, and clutched my blanket with a strong grip. My bed all of a sudden shifted as if something had sat on top of it, and the blanket started to be pulled by an invisible force. At this point, I began yelling and kicking the air, and it vanished, and I never saw it since. I left the room afterwards to do something else because at that point I didn't feel like sleeping. I considered the possibilities of what it could have been, because I am naturally a skeptic and I always look into everything that happens so I can prove the existence of something. 1. I was fully awake and I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. 2. I locked my doors and windows as anyone does in their own home, so it couldn't have been a human entering with a strange costume, unless a door was opened, etc. 3. This was a long time ago, and I think about this moment every day, and I always recall the same details, etc. I even wrote this down a year after it happened, so if it was a dream, it would have become more vague and harder to remember as time went on. 4. The blankets were still where it was when the creature moved them. 5. The carpet still had footprints and imprints from where it invisibly moved towards me. I know this sounds batshit crazy, but this was my experience, and I still wonder what it could have been. I've researched slightly and I've only told a few about it, so I don't know what it could have been.
When I was approximately 7 years old, which would be around 1973/1974, we were living in a mobile home park in Mission, Texas. We had just moved to this mobile home park as my parents had just sold the property we lived on. The park was huge, probably 20 to 30 acres, and it had just opened. There were only 2 or 3 other homes in the whole park, spaced far apart. The park was surrounded by orange groves, so it was relatively isolated. I believe it was called the Trade Winds Mobile Home Park. I don't know if it is still there as I haven't been back to Mission since I left in 1991. One morning, early, before sunrise, I woke up to noise outside my bedroom window. I don't recall clearly what the noise was, but it was enough to rouse my curiosity. I figured it was probably coyotes and was quite curious to catch a glimpse. I had to stand on my bed to look out my window. I was scanning the yard below but didn't see any coyotes. I then noticed motion to my left and turned to see a figure standing next to my mother's car. It was an outline of a large being. It had to be huge as it was several feet taller than the car. I would guess maybe 6.5 to 7.5 feet. The figure was big and bulky, the shoulders very wide and the legs very thick, but all clearly humanoid shaped. The inside of the outline was very dark, like light couldn't escape, best way I can describe it, but the outline was clearly visible. It turned towards me and we just stood there looking at each other for several seconds. I don't know how I knew it could see me, but I did. At this point I did not feel any fear, I was just stunned, trying to understand what I was seeing. It then slowly turned and walked off into the darkness. At this point I jumped from my bed and ran to my parents' room. I woke up my mother and tried to tell her what I had seen, but she insisted it was a bad dream. I knew it wasn't. She got up and continued to get ready for work. She tried to laugh it off, but I kept insisting and did not want her to go outside because the big, invisible man would get her, I feared. At that point she didn't want to hear any more about it. I think I was somewhat in shock and traumatized by the experience. So I said nothing else about it. However, several days later, there was a small article in our local paper, The Monitor, about a local woman who had seen the same exact thing I saw, only she reported it to the police. As I recall, the article made the woman out to be a crazy lunatic. My mother read this article to me and we both just sat there stunned. She then questioned me about it again and told me not to tell anyone. I suppose she didn't want to expose me to ridicule. To this day she refuses to talk about the ordeal. What is even scarier is that some time after this incident I began to recall more and more of the events that happened before I heard the noise outside. I remember laying in my bed, unable to move. This being shining a light in my eyes and telling me that they would be gone shortly, no words were exchanged through. I remember feeling like I was wrapped in thick jello. I could see another being in my room looking through my dresser drawers, for what, I have no idea. The being was shining a flashlight-looking device into my drawers. Only the light, greenish, was coming out of my drawers, not going into my dresser drawers, but the light moved when the being moved the flashlight. I remember starting to panic, then all of a sudden feeling calm. The first being again told me, without words, that they would be done soon and that I would not remember anything and it would be okay. The next thing I remember is waking up to stand up on my bed to look out the window. I have no idea what they were looking for or why. Perhaps I had found something and they wanted it back. I don't know and probably never will. I have never told this story to anyone other than my mother. I have not even told my wife of 18 years this story.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.